Sanbonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 259 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It's a Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and if you're joining us for the first time, well, where have you been? You've missed out on quite a number of great episodes that we have brought to your screens, to your phones, because we're also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. So do make sure that you go to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, to catch up on all the great episodes that we've already had on the show. And to our regular viewers, welcome to it. You know how we do every single weekday at 7 p.m. You and I have an appointment where we tackle a hot property topic that helps us navigate our property journey. Doesn't matter whether you're a landlord, whether you're a tenant, whether you're looking to buy, to sell, or to build. This is the property podcast that you want to make sure you are always tuned into. It's also the only daily property podcast in South Africa, so we really are the authorities on all things relating to property. And of course, one of the other great things that you would be very aware of if you follow us across our social media platforms are the other great shows I love talking about. I'm talking about the Home Shoppers Show that you'll be looking forward to later on this evening at 8 p.m. And you can also watch it every Monday at 8 p.m. where Chad brings you a snapshot on some of the gorgeous properties that you can find on our website. That's on www.privateproperty.co.za. And you can also watch the great videos that Chad does on our TikTok. I actually saw one that we had posted on our Instagram page when he was doing that walk, almost demonstrating how would you walk when you walk into your dream home. So do continue engaging with us on our social media platforms there. And of course, every Tuesdays and Thursdays, we talk all things agriculture, where award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko brings you the Farming Podcast. And if you've got an interest on farming and all things green fingers, then that is the show for you. The other day, Umbali, I think it was actually yesterday, Umbali was actually talking about something that I've had a keen interest in, looking at, how would you go about starting your own sort of crop delivery service. So, those people who would sometimes put together these nice packages and you're able to, let's say buy a basket of fruits and veg for X amount of money. And with many of us, of course, unable to, play around with our green fingers because of where we might be living. Perhaps you don't have a garden, perhaps you don't have a balcony, but you want regular supply of fresh fruit and vegetables. That was a great episode that really gave great insights into what you should be looking at in the event where you want to service that particular market. So do make sure that you tune into the Farming Podcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays for all your farming matters. And on Wednesdays, we don't leave you alone. Essie Clarkson brings you the First Time Home Buyers Show, where she's always in conversation with somebody who's not only walked that first time home buying journey, but has gone on to grow their property portfolio from strength to strength. So if you want to learn from those who've certainly, who are trailblazers in their own right, then do make sure that you tune into that show. Those are some of the great shows that you can look forward to across our social media platforms every weekday at 8 p.m. And of course, you can also keep in touch with us on our social media platforms, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, as well as on TikTok. You can follow myself at Zamantungwa_K on Instagram, as well as on Twitter. Now, this evening we're looking at something that is probably slightly heavy for a Friday, but I think it's actually one of those things that is so crucial, because you don't want to find yourself on the receiving end of it, certainly not from a property perspective or even in your personal capacity, because it can happen to us regardless really of where in our lives we want to almost focus on. And we're looking at how to protect your scheme from fraud. And what I want us to outline, certainly what we're going to be outlining, is firstly just the kinds of fraud that your scheme could potentially be victim of. Because I think it's one thing to talk about how to prevent, all kinds of fraud or protect all kinds of fraud, but let's get a sense of what kind of fraud is actually out there when it comes to us living in sectional title schemes. And then we're going to, look at it from if you're the owner in terms of the fraud that you should be aware of, and also if you're a trustee, because the reality is, trustees have a legal obligation, a fiduciary obligation to make certain decisions on behalf of the scheme. And so you also want to make sure that you don't fall prey to any scams out there. And there certainly are a lot, especially during this period. So we want to make sure that we equip you with the right knowledge to at least get a sense of what to look out for as far as schemes are concerned. And then we're going to look at worst case scenario. Suppose you have fallen victim to fraud of some other nature in your scheme. How do you then sort of go about resolving it? And what are the different channels and avenues that are available for you? I want to hear from you at home. Have you been a victim of fraud? If you have, what was it? It doesn't have to be property related, because as I said earlier, this is something that can happen almost at any stage. We've seen identity theft, and so there's identity fraud, people taking out all kinds of credit in your name, and it really has, a knock-on effect to other areas of your life. So share with us down here below, have you ever been a victim of fraud, and what was, the particular incident, and how did you even go about resolving it, or is this still a matter that you are struggling with right now? Well, to help us better understand how we can protect our schemes from fraud and how to make sure that we are aware of how to even spot some of these scams, somebody who needs no introduction, I'm in conversation with Mike Addison, who's an owner at Addsure. Mike, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Great to be with you again tonight.
It's only a pleasure, Mike. So as usual, I mean, always so great chatting to you because you always have these gems to drop. I think it's always fantastic to have a conversation with people who've been in the industry for 20, 30 years because there are all these different trends that you've been able to, see across the decades that you've been in the industry, which is going to be very helpful for our conversation because I want first for us to get a sense and for our viewers to get a sense of the kinds of fraud that a scheme would typically be able to fall victim of. Because I mean, there's only probably a handful that I can think of at the top of my head, but I'm sure you've probably encountered quite a lot and had to and have had to resolve it for some of your clients. Perhaps take us through the important ones that we should certainly be aware of at home.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. Really great to be here, as I said. The fraud and dishonesty is, it's throughout our lives, and it's, sectional title or community schemes. And tonight we're not actually even going to speak about sectional title per se, but let's talk about community schemes as a whole as far as fraud goes. So it can go over quite a wide range. I thought about this quite a lot this evening. I could make it really boring and just tell you about all the little boring parts, but to make it interesting, I'm probably going to give you some fraud ideas. But I thought, well, we'll mix it up a bit and perhaps give you some examples, but please don't go and use them. But anyway, here we go. So very typically, the bank account. So that's very often the place where things go wrong. So security around your bank account. I won't go into too much depth there, but your bank account would be your one area. The others is invoices. So fraudulent invoices. And you'll be surprised. I could tell you a few stories. We'll let Zama lead us on a few things there. But fraudulent invoices is an area that's tricky. Then people being in cahoots. So you could have a situation where an employee at some managing agency, or could be a trustee, maybe creating invoices in cahoots with a contractor. Then, of course, what's very concerning these days, and I watched a very good presentation a few weeks ago. I think it was also a Friday evening by one of the mortgage originators, where they spoke about fraud in that area. And that was fascinating because they even have to set up little tricks for you to protect your money when you're paying your deposit. I seem to remember that being a very interesting topic. And that can happen as well with payments. So you have a payment being made across, say, from the body corporate, very typically, and I've seen a few with the security company. The security company payment is usually a big one. We had one the other day for 120,000 Rand, where the managing agent was tricked. In fact, wasn't even tricked, they were hacked. Previous ones I've seen have been tricked into providing information, access to the email, invoices changed, electronic fraud or computer fraud, cybercrime, and the managing agent be paying an account into the fraudster's bank account somewhere, wherever it might be. So yeah, those are the typical areas, but it can actually happen at ground level as well. Fictitious needs, inflated jobs, and geezers. Around geezers, you'll be surprised. Geezers, just watch those prices. 8,000 Rand is your normal standard geyser installation. We spoke about geysers last time. 10,000 Rand for your stainless steel. If you've actually increased your limit on your policy to 15,000 Rand for some reason, and you start getting 15,000 Rand invoices from your plumber, big question mark. So yeah, there's quite a few areas, Alma.
And Mike, as you're going through some of those areas, there's a part of me that is thinking about that. I mean, and I've shared this with viewers at home. I've been a trustee a couple of times, and more often than not, one of the things that we do as trustees is, of course, make sure that we approve payments. So we're getting all these invoices on a very, very regular basis, especially if I look at some of the more bigger schemes that I've been a trustee in, and there are all kinds of invoices that are coming in, and we're the ones who have to say it's approved before the managing agent can make sure that that payment is facilitated. And it can be so easy to approve a payment, and the managing agent more often than not might not have a second or third glance at it, because they would have just taken it as a trustees, you've looked at this, you're happy with the price. And I think for me, one of the things that I used to do, and luckily, people that I was trustees with, we would almost look at every line item. So it wasn't just about the total, or if I was happy with the total that were being invoiced, but I would look at every line item. If there was something that is in the line item, even if it's as little as 200 rands, if I don't understand it, I'd raise the issue of, what is it for? Because that's also how some of these contractors get a sense of how vigilant are you? Are you able to, spot these little things? And they'll start off with small amounts, especially those that you work with on a very regular basis. They also know when new trustees kind of take over, because they're aware of when we have our AGMs. So certainly to viewers at home, I do urge you to be vigilant. You almost want to pretend like this is your money that you are, approving, and then you go through that invoice with a fine tooth comb. Because when you just look at it as, I know we've got the money as a scheme, you're just approving, then you won't be as efficient. But when you pretend like that invoice, even if it's as little as 20,000 rands, it's coming out of your own pocket, you will look at every single line item to make sure that it is in fact correct and you're happy with what you've been invoiced. Then also look at it in accordance with the quote. Because one of the things that I find, Mike, and I don't know if you've seen this, is that the quote will have one thing and the line items will be in a certain way. By the time you're invoiced, all of a sudden the things don't correlate, and you're like, what happened here? Why is it, this is the quote that I approved, why have we suddenly changed the invoice, and yet we didn't change the spec of the job? We've scoped the job, we're very clear on what needs to be done. So there are all these little things that I found contractors sometimes do, whether to cut corners or certainly to eat away at your money, because they essentially count on trustees not being on top of their game.
No, you're quite right. There's a lot. And the problem is that you have so many different bodies, corporate, using so many different types of contractor. And there's no one place where you can go and find, is this a list of reputable contractors? And then on the other hand, you don't only want to use large reputable companies. You actually, in our country, I think it's fair to say that we're all trying to help uplift people or entrepreneurs and encourage entrepreneurs into the market. So we want to support the small guys as well. It's just that we have to look at those invoices carefully. You're quite right. I mean, just even the scope of work, as you said, I mean, just a ceiling board, a repair of a ceiling. Now you get an invoice that just says ceiling repair, 5,000 rand. Was it 1 square meter of ceiling or was it 10 square meters of ceiling? Small things like that. As a trustee, ask the questions. I was a trustee a few years ago. Last time, I always try not to be a trustee, but I know it's a thankless job. But I've been a trustee many times myself, and we've got in our complex, we've got a very, very good managing agent. And I still, when I was a trustee, I still used to question just about every third invoice. That's how many invoices come through, and how often sort of the stat is that there was something that pricked my interest. 1 out of 3 invoices, even though the managing agent was brilliant. Small things that you can ask: why isn't there a square meterage here on the amount of, as I said, ceiling? How much pipe was used here? What was the area that was painted? And then on invoices that come to your section, here's a typical one: a tap was replaced. Okay, well, I always suggest write on the invoice, tap at building 5 behind the bin room was replaced. Even if you've got the invoice, handwriting, correct, so that later on when you can say, but hang on, haven't we paid that tap already? And then the geysers, make sure the invoice has got the unit number which is being the geyser which is being replaced, because and make sure that the plumber has got it right, because he might go and be lazy and just see a geyser, so he thinks it's for that unit, and he writes the wrong geyser number down. And then you can actually quite easily flip that geyser again a few months later. Then, so many little things that you can look out on invoices, and also look around. anything that pertains to a section or near a section, handwrite over the invoice before you pay it out, so it gets scanned and it's your records you've got a good paper trail. The other thing, I've got a list of things that I pick up off invoices. I was telling you earlier before we started the show that I've actually got 15 items that you can spot on an invoice very quickly. What's the contractor's name? You know how often they're spelt incorrectly. The word plumbing spelled wrong. And then that's just a little signboard. Is the supplier registered anywhere? No. What's the address? Even the addresses can be spelt incorrectly. They've just used, is it on a Word document or is it come through properly on a PDF document that can't be amended? VAT number, is the VAT correct? Is it 15%? Is the VAT number on there, or is he going to just score the extra 15% for himself and not put it through? So 15% on 100,000 Rand is a lot of money. And there are many little things that you can find on an invoice. What number is the invoice? 0003. That should raise a question.
That should raise a question if it's September and they're still on the third invoice, right?
Yeah.
If it's January, then
yes.
I can understand it.
Little things, you can. But those are some of the ways. But computer fraud is a big concern. Really, it is. And hacking in and changing an invoice, if it's electronic, is probably the highest risk that I can think of at the moment. There's lots of that going on, or attempts being made thereat.
We are taking your questions and comments this evening as we look at how to protect your scheme from fraud. I want to hear from you at home if you've ever been a victim of fraud. It doesn't necessarily have to be property related. It would be, first prizes, of course, if it's property related. And how did you go about resolving it? We've got a comment coming in from Ulindisi Chabela, and this one actually even makes me see red, because we've spoken about this particular instance and how this should not be done. So the fact that this law firm has actually done this literally makes me see red. Lindy says, unfortunately, most of our clients suffered from this law firm, which we cannot mention for legal purposes. They used the money that was in their trust account. The matter is currently with the Law Society, and a few of our clients have been reimbursed. And I'm glad that the Law Society is dealing with this. I know that they tend to take that particular infringement quite seriously, because we know that money that's in the trust account is not meant to be touched. And that's why we put it there, because we also know that that's sort of the middle ground where the money is safe and it's going to go to where it's meant to go, whether it's to the bank or the person who sold the property or the municipality, or all the different avenues that money would ultimately need to go to. We've got another comment here coming from Glad Shirinda saying, not sure, but I think what HOAs and managing agents introduced in estates and complexes, that agents need accreditation fees to be able to sell inside, its fraud, as this is not regulated by the State Agency Affairs Board. Do you know about that one, Mike?
Okay, so am I understanding the question correctly? In a nutshell, is she asking whether the State Agents Affairs Board?
No, so she's essentially just pointing out how with some HOAs or even managing agents, they've essentially said they've introduced that agents need accreditation fees in order to sell inside the particular estate.
That's another subject. I don't think that's really fraud related. That's a matter of moral and ethics. And I seem to remember that was raised recently on whether or not that's allowed. Oh, yes, I saw, I'm remembering a CSOS presentation that was done this week by CSOS, or the lady from CSOS, and she actually said that would be not good practice. In fact, those rules to that effect would not be even allowed. But what I was going to respond to, because I thought I'd understood it, is that what is quite nice is that it is actually compulsory in terms of CSOS regulation 15, and I don't want to get boring with referencing the legal jargon, but it's bodies, corporate and HOAs, in fact, any community scheme, it's compulsory that you have fidelity cover, which is protection against fraud and dishonesty, and even a minimum amount. It's set out in a formula. And so that has given, since 2016, you could say early into 2017 onwards, Bodies Corporate have been getting that right. So most HRAs and Bodies Corporate have been doing this correctly, and they have claims have come through and they've been protected. Whereas before 2016, the rules in that regard were pretty much ignored, and losses, when losses came, the finger started being pointed. So things are looking a lot better in terms of protection these days.
And Mark, before we look at how to resolve instances where you have fallen victim to fraud in your scheme, let's perhaps touch on potential fraud that could happen to an owner who lives in a community scheme, because a lot of what we've covered would predominantly be something that trustees need to be particularly aware of, and I think one of the things is perhaps we might even have a different episode around what to look out for in invoices, because I think this would even help owners and trustees alike. I want to find out what kind of fraud could potentially happen to owners in particular, because more often than not, we deal obviously with the managing agent that runs the scheme. Perhaps sometimes you might deal with the trustees, very rarely, really. So what kind of fraud should we be mindful of as owners in community schemes?
That's a good one. I'm lucky I just thought of it, because my memory is not usually so good. But I just thought of a case which is something I've been pondering on for actually a while. So an owner, computer fraud is something you must be very careful of. The chances are you're online. I think everybody's online these days, and you're paying your accounts. So even in the community scheme environment as an owner, here's an example. An owner is in arrears. So an owner is got supposed to be paying 2,500 or 3,000 rand a month, includes of his electricity and his levy and what have you. 3,000 rand, times 3 or 4 months quickly builds up. And this particular owner was in arrears to the tune of about 10,000. So the managing agent called the owner and said, listen, you must pay this 10,000 rand up to date. Otherwise, you're going to be handed over, or whatever the case might be. And the owner said, no, that's fine. Just send me the bank account that I must pay this into. So the managing agent sent him the bank account on an email, what bank account it must pay it into. And the owner promptly paid into the bank account. Only problem is, somewhere in between, that was interfered with. That email was gotten hold of, and a different bank account was given. And now you stand in an awkward position, because who in earth, whose email was in fact hacked, and who's now liable? The managing agent, the body corporate, or the HRA, or the owner? Well, the owner still hasn't paid his account. That's the short of it at this stage. But this one is an interesting case. Now, this is all new stuff. When I say it's new stuff, obviously computer fraud has been happening for a long time, but it's becoming more and more prevalent in the community scheme environment. So owners, when you're paying, and this could be for anything, this could be for your account, personal bank account, or to pay some personal account. If you're paying a largish amount, and I mean, 10,000 rand might not be large to somebody, but I consider 10 to be bigger than I would like to lose. Yeah. And I would double check on the bank account number. I might put a phone call through to the managing agent and say, just want to check my bank account that you've just sent me. Can you just read it to me again? I just want to verify what you've sent me, and then pay it. That would be the best you can do. And watch out, because this is happening all the time and won't happen to me. Well, I get funny things all the time, in my email box. So just be very, very careful there. I think that would probably be tip number 1, exaggerated in bold, underlined. That's probably the biggest risk factor.
And I want to echo that, because one of the things, Mike, that I've also seen is that sometimes as owners, and it's not just owners, because I've seen this happen, even outside of a context of property, where people will write the incorrect number and end up depositing money into the wrong account. So even when, let's say, you do have the right account number, as you're sort of putting that account in, double check. I know that, for example, a lot of the banks right now, I'm not going to reveal which one is my primary bank, but you're able to do a quick search if, the account details that you've put in do in fact belong to who you intend to pay. It's a very nominal amount, so you're not going to have to pay much. I know a number of the big banks have that service. So rather do that. I think it's probably less than 10 rands for that particular service. Rather go to the trouble of verifying that that is in fact, Z Khumalo's bank account that you're about to, deposit 10,000 rands in, than to put in an incorrect number and somebody else has got that amount, because retrieving money from somebody you've paid incorrectly is a nightmare, a complete nightmare that I do not wish on anybody at all. Mike, before we wrap up, how do we then resolve issues? And I know I'm asking this broadly because it would depend, of course, on the nature of the fraud, but any tips on how we can go about resolving, issues where perhaps we have fallen victim of fraud as an owner or certainly as trustees? What are some of the active steps can we try and take early on to address the matter?
You mean if it's happened, or you want to prevent? So preventative?
No, it's happened already. So it's now happened, and you're trying to resolve it as much as possible.
I've got one big tip to make, is that just say, for example, a fraud has occurred and say an amount of 100,000 has been paid over to the wrong person, and or there's a fraud involved. You've got to be careful that you don't quickly go and pay it up again, because then your insurance company that you might be insured for against fraud might not entertain your claim. All right, now I'm saying that because you might be admitting liability when you weren't really liable, and now you've paid something and now the insurance company are compromised. So before you make good on anything where there's a problem, contact your insurance company first of all and get the authority or the okay to go ahead and make good, so that you're not admitting liability and prejudicing their position. So that would be a tip number one. Speak to your insurance company and take action immediately, and it depends on what has happened. You would report it to the relative authority. I mean, if it's money laundering, that's a different matter completely. Now we're talking a different matter where certain people need to report that. But on a fraud, on a normal fraud, you've just lost, the body corporate has just lost a whole lot of money. You get your broker involved, I would say, as a good start to make sure you don't go stamping around in the wrong places.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, that's a great place to leave it at. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure. It was great. Great again, as usual.
And that is Mike Addison, who's an owner at Addsure. And that brings us to the end of this evening's episode of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It's also the last episode for the week. We're back on your screens on Monday evening at 7 p.m. Of course, you can look forward to the Home Shoppers Show at 8 p.m. with Chad. Until then, hope you're going to have a great weekend and stay home and stay safe.
Hi, I'm Cornita Bobbs. I'm a BCom student at Stellenbosch University. I currently live in Valgevonden Estate and I absolutely love this area. Historically, Stellenbosch is known as a student town. It offers an incredibly peaceful lifestyle, and the people around town are always welcoming and friendly. Because it's a small town, there's an amazing community vibe with some really authentic coffee shops and restaurants. The trees along Victoria Street create a beautiful environment to be in, and it's really cool for students passing through campus. There's some excellent boys and girls schools in the area. Our town has such a rich history, but at the same time it's really modern, and you'll find some amazing art installations all around. The sunrises and sunsets are some of the best in the world. It's the most beautiful place to call home. I've lived here for the past 5 years, and it's been an unforgettable experience. And this is my neighborhood.